Hello one and all, and welcome to today's episode of Webflow and Code, where I teach you the underlying code you're writing in Webflow. Today we're going to take a look at jQuery and JavaScript and the basic foundations so you can start manipulating content on your website. In particular, the little copyright notice that you often see on the bottom of web pages, which sometimes is embarrassingly out of date. So we're gonna learn how we can change that date, and what we're gonna not only do is just break down exactly what's going on. So I'll link the code in the description so you can copy and paste it, but that's not really the point. The point is that we want to be able to understand what each part is doing, so then you can take that and use it in other parts of your project. This will be the first in like the JavaScript sort of series, so I think this is a good place to lay the foundations, and we'll get into more exciting stuff later on. So if you're keen and you're excited to learn a bit of JavaScript and jQuery, then stick around. So we're going to do all of this inside of the browser because it's just easier to demonstrate things, and plus I just want to show you a few different ways you can actually use the web inspector. So I'm just going to inspect the element here, and what I've created, this is a Webflow project. What I've just created a footer with a paragraph, and then I've wrapped the date in a span. Okay, now let's probably give that a class of, I thought I did, to be honest, but I've given that a class of year, and then we'll publish that. If you don't know how to create a span, you can literally just select the text. Let's try it with this bit. Select the text and just click the style tag, and then you can wrap it in a span then, but we don't want to do it on that one. So when I refresh that, we should have a span with the class of year, okay? First of all, let's talk about jQuery and JavaScript, right? Personally, I prefer writing things pure JavaScript. jQuery is actually really good. It makes writing JavaScript and doing things very, very simple. But the problem is that you're downloading a massive library when sometimes you're probably only using a small percentage of that. There is jQuery Lite, which is a bit smaller, but still, if you know how to write raw JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript they call it, then your code and your website is going to be a lot faster and a lot more efficient. But because of the animations that Webflow uses, the interactions and things like that, jQuery is actually included in our project. So we get access to jQuery for free. So we might as well use it. We will get into vanilla JavaScript, I think. We will get into that, but I think let's just get going. It's a lot easier to start with jQuery. It's a lot easier to start understanding JavaScript with jQuery. I started learning JavaScript with jQuery. I started, if it's any consolation to you, I started by just copying and pasting jQuery, mostly jQuery, because it was so big when I started creating websites. I started by copying and pasting jQuery code and kind of just working out like the number, or change, or if I change this, then that means I get a slide added, or it moves faster, or something like that. And that's really how I learned JavaScript. And then I sort of got to learn jQuery, and then I got to learn JavaScript a little bit later on in my career. I actually set myself a challenge to only use JavaScript for just 1 week, and what I ended up doing, if I would want to do something with JavaScript, I would write it sort of out in Google, and I would say something like add class vanilla JavaScript or add class JavaScript, and then I would find the equal code. There are some hacks and some weird things which I'll probably get into in this episode, so we'll do that. But let me try and remember the website that I used, and I'll link this below in the description. You might not need jQuery.com. Here it is. So look, here's the jQuery version, and there's the JavaScript version, right? And oftentimes, I mean, network requests are notoriously ugly in JavaScript, but oftentimes it'll be a case of very, you're not really giving yourself much advantage by using jQuery. You're just adding a bunch of useless libraries for no reason. So hide is literally just set in display none. Now, just really quickly, I don't want to get into this, and I'll be making an episode about this, but you can see that to fade it in, they're adding and removing a class in JavaScript, and then you're using CSS to actually, you're actually adding the transitions in CSS. You know, animations in JavaScript are very, very heavy. GreenSock, all these sorts of animation libraries, they're very heavy, and including the one in Webflow, to be honest, they're not as performant. And if you can get away with adding CSS instead of animating things in JavaScript, you can get so much more performance on your website. And I'll put in the card an episode I did on performance and transitions and things like that. But that'll be for another day. We'll get into that. But you might not need JavaScript. It was a great website in transitioning me from jQuery over to JavaScript. We'll save that for another day. But for now, let's jump right into our Webflow project that I've created. The first thing I wanted to talk about is what they call an IIFE. Now, I always forget what an IIFE stands for. So let's just do a quick Google. So an IIFE function, okay, here we go. An IIFE function looks like this. This is a great example of an IIFE. And what this is doing, and I'll link this little article in the description, but essentially what it's doing. Not so fast, Monkey Boy. So I'm editing this episode and I did a very, very bad job of explaining an IIFE. Basically, an IIFE stops your code that's inside of the IIFE leaking into the global scope. So if you create a variable inside your IIFE, and we'll get into the variables in the episode, if you create them inside the IIFE, you can't access them outside of the IIFE. So you don't get conflicts with other libraries and things like that. Which takes me to my second point, is that often you should really have your JavaScript down the bottom of your page, because websites load line by line. If you've got the JavaScript code at the bottom, you've made sure that the rest of the website and all the HTML is there before getting to the code. Whereas if you load it at the top and the code isn't there, you're going to break your website, or there are going to be some errors and things like that. If we create our IIFE, so what I've done here, I've gone onto console, and now I can just write JavaScript. I can write console.log hello, and it will console log hello. So I can start to write JavaScript in this little console here. So if I write my IIFE and then invoke it, we can get jQuery into this thing. So what this is doing, it's invoking these two brackets, means it's invoking it, and it's passing jQuery into this function. And then we can define this however we want. We can define it as underscore. We can define it however we want. But a common way and an advised way is just to put $, there, and we've redefined jQuery as $, so that we can use it as $. You can already do this, but when we've got an IIFE, it just makes it a bit. In fact, I won't know the specifics, but I'll do some research after the episode and plug it in here. We pass in jQuery to the IIFE, and what that's doing is it's giving the code inside of the IIFE its own version of jQuery. You're not affecting the global version of jQuery. There are reasons why you want to do that. We don't get into it here, so I won't get into it in this video. But that's essentially, in a nutshell, what it is. Back to the episode. So if you see this in the footer of your page, the script in the bottom of your page, that's what this is doing. But now that we have access to jQuery, we can do, this is the kind of core of jQuery, and it's this. We're using jQuery here, and we're calling the function. So if I just press enter there on $, it will tell us that is a function. So this is us calling a function, and we can pass things into this function. And for the context of this specific walkthrough, we're going to pass it a string, which is two commas like this, two speech marks like this, or you can do that as well. It really doesn't matter. You can pass both of them in, and we can pass in a string of a CSS selector. So again, I'll link an item in the cards around how we write CSS selectors, but essentially a dot is a class, a hash is an ID. You can also target all the H1 tags. You can target all the paragraph tags. You can pass in CSS selectors in this selector here. So A more complicated one is that we want to select all selectors, and then you can use attributes here with a name of, I don't know, email. But there'll be nothing here. So if I press enter on that, there'll be nothing, and you can see length is 0. But we know that we have a span with a class of year. So we've got a class, year, and I expect this now to have a length of 1, which it does. And we've got our span tag, okay? That's our first sort of lesson in jQuery and JavaScript. This is how we get elements. We've got access to this element now, and we can actually chain onto this, this function things we want to do to it. So what do we want to do with it? We want to change the year. What jQuery has is a function. Now we can chain a function by pressing a full stop, and then we have access to all the functions that jQuery gives us. And I know that we have access to a text function, and that is a function like this. And now we can pass it whatever text we want. Hello. There we go. You see that it's changed up here. It's changed that to whatever we want. We can do that as many times as we want. So I've done a typo there, so let's add a thing. We can do that as many times as we want. And we can do other things. We can do HTML. There's a HTML function. Now, I know these functions because I've been using it so long. I obviously don't expect you to know all these functions. You can go on jQuery's website, jQuery, and actually find out what functions you have access to. So here's like an A to Z list of all of the functions, like data, CSS, click, change. And these are chainable with, once you've got an element, you can say I want to do something before, and then when you click into that, then it will tell you what you can do. We won't get into that, but the point is that the documentation is there. What I would suggest you do is, in your Google search, I would suggest you type jQuery update text, right? And there you go. It's the first item in the list. So I would advise that you write your questions out in plain English in Google. It's gone straight through. Get the combined text contents of each element in the set. So let's actually read that. Get the combined text contents of each element in the set of matched elements, including their descendants, or set the text contents of the matched element. What does that mean? You've got two examples of the text method here. One of them gets text. So it would say get the combined text contents of each element in the set of matched elements. What that means, set of matched elements, means the jQuery function that we've learned about. This will be a set of matched elements. Now there's only one element here, but if I don't think we have anything that's got multiple, to be honest. But if I don't know, actually let's just put star. You can see that star is the CSS selector for all elements. Now you can see we've got loads here, and in fact if we open it up, we've got a list of 18. So that is our set of matched elements. Not all elements are going to be able to, you're going to be able to do the same things to every single element, but just for argument's sake, that's what they're saying here. So get the combined text contents. So let's do that. Let's go $. I know this is wrapped in a footer. So the copyright, with the copyright icon, copyright and hello is wrapped in a footer. So I can go footer, so no full stop, no hash, and I want to get the combined text of that. So good exercise to say, what do I expect from here? I expect copyright logo, copyright and hello. And there it is, it returns the text. So that's the first function of the text method. Or set the text contents, which is exactly what I showed you, where if we pass in something to that method, that's what it will set it to. So now I can change the whole thing to, you know, I won't do that because that will mess up our little instruction video here, but then I could change the whole thing there. So that's a kind of quick rundown of using jQuery and how to maybe find your way through learning and all the rest of it. The next lesson I could teach you is that you can actually store a reference to elements in a variable. How you do that is var. You might see const, C-O-N-S-T. You might see let, L-E-T. Now they are really handy in that I won't go into exactly what they do, but they're all replacement of var. The problem with using those is actually that you might be, your website might run on a browser that doesn't support those later the later versions of our variable. So whenever you see const or whenever you see let, I would advise you just replace that with var, and then we can name our variable here. So I'm going to name it date. I have a feeling we can't use date because it might be like a reserved word or something. So I'm just going to name it my date. Okay. And now I can actually I'm going to name that my date element, EL. And what we can do now is get that, and we can just press enter, and we've stored our reference to the date in my dateEl. And I can type that out, it will know it's there, and you can see it's giving us a little preview of what that actually is. So now I can reference it and just treat it as if I've just done this. Okay? And a little tidbit of information is that when you run functions, or when you do something, you don't want to go finding elements once you run the function, because you can actually slow down the performance of running that function. So what you might want to do is store the reference to this year element right when the page loads, so you've always got it, and then when the function runs, that's when you actually manipulate that element. So you know, use that as you will. We're dealing with very simple things right now, so I wouldn't worry too much about where you set the element and where you store it and all the rest of it, whether it's in a function or whatever. But that's just information. I guess what I'm trying to do is prepare you for what you might see in certain articles on the internet and how you might interpret those things. So sorry if we keep getting sidetracked, but I'm just trying to make sure that you're able to navigate this whole JavaScript thing by yourself. So we've got our mydateEl stored in a myDate like variable, okay, and we can do whatever we want with that now. So if let's just do that. mydateEl.text equals, let's just put it back to 2020, okay? So we can do whatever we want with that element now. The next thing we want to do is get the date, okay? We actually want to get today's year. So I don't know this off by heart actually, so I'm just going to go to Google, get current year JavaScript. Get the current year in JavaScript. You know, this isn't rocket science, and it gives me my line of code there. Okay, look, they've even got a little snippet of code here, which of course you can copy, but let's just try and understand what we're doing. So we could do that, and that will just get us the year, and you can see our little console has predicted what it's going to do. But what you might want to do as well is set another variable and say today's year equals. Okay, so today's year is 2020. We stored it. We've stored it in a variable called today's year. Now we can use that and combine it with our mydateEl and actually get today's date, put in the content of the thing. So in fact, let's go greatest year on the planet, 1987. So we've got mydateEl. I've just pressed up, by the way, just then, and it will navigate through my previous, and down then navigates through my previous things. So up. Oh, I've gone to last now. Let's just start from scratch, right? So we've got mydateEl.text. Oh, another point. I think it's quite helpful to store JavaScript objects, because JavaScript objects look a bit different with a preceding $sign. Okay, so how I would probably have done the storing of the element, I would probably put $. There, so I know that that is a jQuery element then, and I can do certain things. When it's not, then I know it's not jQuery, and I can't use jQuery functions on that element, if that makes sense. So there we go, we're back. We've just created a new variable called myDateEl, and we want to set the text and then open the function, and then we want to put today's year, come on, today's year inside that function. And there we have it, 2020. So obviously that was a lot of bashing out and a lot of, like, you know, figuring out the code. What does that all look like in its final form? So we'll make an IIFE. I know that's going to have $1 in it, so I'm just going to do that. Already. So this is just going to run on page load. So var today's year equals, let's just copy that. Line 1 done. Var dateEl. Now we're going to make it a jQuery element, and we're just going to find that element with the class of year. So I've got two things now, and all I need to do then is go, what was it, dateEl.text equals today's year. And these 3 lines of code will just run as soon as the page loads, and it will get us today's year. So that's it. I mean, obviously we're gonna grow and we're gonna develop this knowledge, but there's a few things, just to recap what we learned. We learned about an IIFE, which essentially doesn't pollute the global scope, and anything we write in here will be locked into our website. We don't necessarily need to worry about it too much, because with Webflow, we're not going to be creating JavaScript libraries, but it just might be something you see, so there it is. We've learned about passing jQuery into our function as $, so that we can use it as $. We can change that to anything we want. It could be Sam, it could be Webflow, it could be whatever. We're just naming it. And then that's how we reference jQuery from inside of our IIFE. Then we're getting the full year and storing it in today's year variable. We're getting our year element and storing it in a $dateEl element. And again, these can be whatever you want. It's probably best that you call them something that is self-explanatory. And then finally, we're actually running that method. We're actually running the text method on dateEl. So that's a basic introduction to JavaScript, and I hope this was helpful, and I hope it sets the foundation for doing more and more things. Remember, you've got jQuery API to start figuring out certain methods, what you want to do. You know, let's just do one more thing, and we'll say year, which actually, let's just use our variable. Is myDateEl, where myDateEl is on the global scope, and let's put add class yellow. So we're passing it a string. We're passing it a string, and that will add the class. So if I just run that, go and inspect our element here, so you can see it here. You can see I've added that class yellow, and that can do various things. If we had a class of yellow in our CSS that makes the text yellow color, then it would have made that text color yellow, because we've added the class which references the CSS and which will equal whatever we want. So just referring back to what we did earlier. I guess that's the problem with doing these JavaScript things. It's easy to sort of tail off, especially when you're just trying to be mindful of people's knowledge and understanding and their level of experience with JavaScript. So just try to maybe do some catch-alls of what you may or may not see. But I hope this starts to get the ball rolling in JavaScript, and I hope that you can now start picking things apart and doing some interesting things with it. We'll grow, we'll do some more JavaScript lessons, and we will get better as we grow. So until the next time, happy no coding.